Everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be participating in this event. My name is Ashley Jacobson. I'm a disability and civil rights attorney, a proud disabled woman myself, living with autoimmune disease, and I'm excited to share my presentation with you all today. All right, so as I said before, my name is Ashley Jacobson. I'm a disability and civil rights lawyer, but my journey to where I am today really started a long time ago. I grew up really athletic. I was a competitive figure skater for 13 years. I played volleyball and I even ran a half marathon. And then all of a sudden, literally 2 months after my half marathon, I became really sick. And so, in the 3 years after I ran the half marathon, I was in the hospital over 90 times. I was eventually diagnosed with lupus and other really common co occurring chronic illnesses. And I was learning to live with this new acquired disability while going to graduate school for counseling people with disabilities. So I was blessed with the opportunity to learn a lot about the disability community while learning to identify as a member of that community. And then in my counseling career, a lot of my counseling clients were dealing with legal issues, and I was having trouble finding lawyers that I could send them to because they didn't have a good understanding of all the barriers and disability rights and things like that. So I went to law school, and that's why I do what I do today. I always say that joining Club Disabled really brought some, of course, challenges into my life, but it brought a lot of blessings as well. And I'm really happy to be able to serve my community in this way. Many of you know about maybe your own personal experiences, but a little quick overview. At least 1 in 4 adults in the United States currently lives with a disability. Internationally, that number is closer to 1 in 5, but that is still a lot of people. And the disability community is incredibly diverse. It includes people of all genders, races, sexual orientations, identities. And because the disability community is so diverse, there are many different disability rights laws at the federal level and at the state level. And the important thing is that you know that you qualify as having a disability because then you know you qualify for these rights. But not everyone realizes that their condition is a disability. So when we're talking about disability and what that looks like in our everyday life, we commonly use these terms accessibility and inclusion. So I might reference those throughout this presentation. And accessibility is really making sure that everyone has equal access to meetings, materials, events, ideas. And this is for everywhere, not just school and work, but in the community. Inclusion is the idea that people with and without disabilities from all types of backgrounds and in all types of identity groups can have equal access to fulfillment, opportunities, and participation in our communities. So it's a great ideal to want, but unfortunately, there's still a lot of discrimination that occurs. And so disability rights were created to address that discrimination. So under the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, you're considered to have a disability if you meet one of 3 criteria. So you just have to meet one of them. The first one is that you have a condition that significantly impairs one or more major life functions. This could be, eating or sleeping or moving physically around, things that you do on a day-to-day basis. It could include, your ability to dress, to, go to work and things like that. Or you're considered to have a disability if you have a record of being diagnosed with one. So, for example, people who had cancer but they're in remission, they could still have disability rights because they have a record of having that cancer diagnosis. But you're also considered to have a disability if other people think or regard you as having one. So if you face the stigma of the disability community, because people think you have a disability, you're covered under the ADA. And the Americans with Disabilities Act covers many different settings and has a lot of different functions. Most people hear about it in the context of reasonable accommodations for school and work. And accommodations, I'll get into that shortly, but that's just one part of the ADA. It's also making sure that you can access buildings and businesses and events, and it covers transportation and not just workplaces and schools. Talking about schools, there are these prominent disability rights laws that you may have heard about. IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is one of them, and the other is the Rehab Act. Under IDEA, this is for children and even young adults who require specialized instruction. So maybe they're being pulled into a resource room for part of the day. They require a little bit more intervention in the school setting. And so with IDEA, you're entitled to learning in the least restrictive environment. You're entitled to equal access to education and non-discriminatory testing. And IDEA covers people that, I mean, we're talking early childhood, not even 1 year old in some cases, through in some states up to the age of 26. Whereas the Rehab Act, you've probably heard of this in the context of Section 504, if you've heard of like a 504 plan. This is for students that don't require quite as many educational interventions or specialized instruction, but for students that are still entitled to certain accommodations and accessibility measures. So maybe extra time on tests or a private testing room, or receiving homework in a different format, or in the workplace, Section 504 often applies in workplace settings as well. As a lawyer, excuse me, and a disabled woman, I have faced discrimination and I've seen my clients face discrimination. And oftentimes people say, well, it's great that we have all of these laws, but what can we do about it? And there are a lot of different options, some more affordable than others, but you may be surprised to learn that many of these options are affordable. So for example, you could write a complaint through the complaints process to the EEOC and your state's Department of Civil Rights. These agencies are tasked with investigating and enforcing disability rights laws when they're violated. They don't always move the quickest, and they don't take on every case. And so that's why it's important to know these other options. But it is free to submit these complaints on your own. So obviously, if you can have somebody help you with that, who's trained in working with these agencies, that might be more helpful. But you can also, through education disputes, get someone to file a due process complaint for you or your child. And this due process complaint would allow the school to sit down with you and mediate, hopefully find a solution for your child, or maybe it's for you. And this often comes into play when a parent believes that a child should have a certain accommodation in a school setting. The school says, no, we don't think that's necessary. The parent files a due process complaint. The school has to respond pretty quickly. And then if it's not resolved in mediation, it goes in front of a hearing, or goes to a hearing in front of an administrative law judge. But then there are other options, obviously suing at the state or federal level, or both. And then there are the informal options, like reporting it to your supervisor or to the principal at a school. And more seriously, because often people with disabilities are involved in altercations with police or first responders who aren't always trained in knowing how to work with them, it's not uncommon for these first responders or police officers to either intentionally or unintentionally violate someone's disability rights. And so you may, if you're in that situation, wind up reporting that to like an internal affairs office or to the district attorney's office. One resource that's really good for informing police and first responders that you have a disability and therefore you have disability rights is to have a disability ID card. And I do have those linked on my website for free. Securing disability rights was vital to our access in the community. But the fight isn't over, and we're only here because of the disability advocates that came before us. People with disabilities have always been in existence, but for decades they were segregated and isolated and penalized for even going out in public. But with social media nowadays, there has been a vast improvement in awareness and also in gathering our resources to improve public policies pertaining to disability. At work, how might you be able to challenge some of the stigmas and stereotypes that exist today? It's all about knowing your rights, those rights that those advocates and perhaps you have been fighting for. It's important to understand how every single situation, every business decision can affect you and the disability community, because this might affect what you ask for as a disabled employee. Unfortunately, hiring discrimination is still rampant. In 2020, 80% of people with disabilities were unemployed, despite many of them being capable of employment and qualified. In that same year, only 40% of non-disabled were unemployed. So discrimination still occurs, and one of the best ways you can fight that is to know those options I discussed before and know what your rights are. And even once you get the job, we have all of these considerations. Do you disclose your disability at work? How do you disclose that? And for me as a lawyer, I often am counseling people on what to do and determining if they should or should not. It's an incredibly personal decision. I do on my website, which is, and I also have linked in this presentation, a video that goes into all of the factors you should consider before disclosing a disability. And of course, some people's disabilities are more readily apparent when you first meet them than others, and that's taken into account in that presentation. But once you're in the workplace, if your accommodations are denied or you are the victim of inappropriate comments that your coworkers or bosses are making about your disabilities, you have a lot of disability rights backing you up. Among those rights are those accommodations that I mentioned before. Disabled individuals have a right to reasonable accommodations in the workplace, schools, and many other settings. And this allows you to show your true abilities. Accommodations are not special treatment. They're removing inherently discriminatory barriers in these environments that have historically been proven discriminatory. We want to make sure that you understand the symptoms of your disability really well, which I know that for many of you, you do, but also how that translates to the workplace. Because you need to understand that asking for accommodations doesn't make you a burden, it actually makes you an asset to your employer, and that everybody benefits when you receive them. So accommodation examples that benefit everyone. This might mean not playing background music in shared work areas, captioning on workplace meetings, remote work options, which during the pandemic, we saw a lot of workplaces now finally allow that. And allowing coworkers to maybe use headphones or not use headphones or use certain lighting. And these are all things that are reasonable depending on your disability. You know your abilities and needs better than anyone else. And so when you are applying for a job or you're signing up for a class and you want to know how to enforce your disability rights, really think about as you picture yourself throughout the day in that school or in that workplace, how do the symptoms of your disability show up and how do you adapt to that environment? And a great resource for evaluating accommodations is to seek a certified rehabilitation counselor. Sometimes they're also called vocational rehabilitation counselors. That's what I did before I became a lawyer. These are individuals who have master's level training to work with the disability community and assess things like accommodations, but also to help you advocate or to make you feel more empowered as you pursue these opportunities. And each state in the US has a free vocational rehabilitation agency. So you should definitely look that up if you're interested in accommodations that may be right for you, or you can speak with a disability rights lawyer like myself. But I can't state this enough. Anyone can become disabled at any time. And I know a lot of you know that. Some people are born with disability and some people aren't. But when you enter these spaces, whether it's in a school or a workplace, you're bringing your perspective and your valued experience living with your condition to that environment. You are definitely an asset in that environment. Think of all of the ways in which your disability might have trained you, or your child's disability might have trained you to deal with unpredictability, to be able to adapt in the moment, to have empathy. These are all things that are great for our communities. And that the disability community is really diverse. And part of that diverse community is recognizing that we have all these resources out there from people that have the same conditions as us, different conditions, who have professional backgrounds like me, or just have a lot of experience navigating all of these complex systems. I mentioned your state vocational rehab agency, but there's also your local Center for Independent Living, which is a great resource. The CDC Disability Inclusion resource page. Obviously, my social media pages share a lot of resources, but one of my favorite websites to refer people to if they're interested in disability rights is to look at askjan.org, askjan.org. And this website allows you to search by workplace environment, by school, by disability, by symptom, and it will give you just tons of accommodation examples, a lot of accessibility tools, and other resources. But additionally, immerse yourself in disability advocacy online, even if you're not sharing your own experience. When you're following other disability advocates, you're benefiting from their very valued experiences as well. I list some of them here, and there are a lot of great podcasts out there as well. And, it's something that has really empowered me as a disabled woman, but also as a professional, informed my professional choices as well. So now at this point, I think we're ready to take on some questions. And I'd just like to say that it's been really great sharing this with you all today. And I'm happy to be of service or answer any questions should you have them.